Hello, everyone, and welcome to an overview of statistics in educational research. And this video is a precursor to the live workshop that will take place next month. And so, by way of the table of contents, there are 8 sections to this video, but the meat of it will be in the fourth and fifth section. So there'll be an introduction followed by some details for the background. Then we will look at some modern day applications of statistics in educational research. And in section 4, this is where we'll talk about what this video is really all about, making sure that you have a fundamental understanding of research design as well as the various types of research methodology. Then we'll take a brief look at some of the concepts important to data collection. And finally, we will end with some outline of the different types of statistical analyses and how you should be presenting the findings of your statistical analysis. So let's go to the beginning. I am Dr. Yuona Thiessen, and I am a data scientist and a statistician as well as an educator. And so this is a topic that combines the things that I'm very passionate about, education and statistics. And so in this course, in this video session, I will outline the purpose of the presentation, talk about the history, the background of education and statistical research in education, statistical application in education, and then go over some of the key concepts that will be covered. So, just to orient you, we are going to embark on this journey of research, of scientific inquiry. And so you must be familiar with the steps involved. And so before you can embark on any type of research, you first have to be sure of what the problem is. Identify the area that you are interested in, the phenomenon, the issue, the question that you want to learn more about, and then you develop, you hone a research question, which is different from a general question. A research question is one that is testable by data. And after you have your research question, from that, you will get your hypothesis and you'll be able to design your research based on the various types of research designs out there. And then you can align your methodology with your research design, and then you can embark on collecting the data for your analysis. And once you've collected the data, now you can apply the statistical techniques, which you're going to master in the course, and then you can report on your findings and be rewarded for your endeavors. So now, when we're talking about the statistics, it's important to understand the reason why statistics is so important to not just educational research, but research in general. So, scientific inquiry is a very important form of epistemology. It is one of the main ways by which we gain knowledge. And scientific inquiry depends on the application of statistics. And so for education research, just like in research in medicine or in finance or in agriculture, all of the research depends on the application, the right application of the principles of statistics. take a look now at some background. We're going to look at the history of statistics in educational research, and then we'll take a bird's eye view of some of the trends out there, as well as some of the opportunities that are available. So, firstly, no discussion on the history of statistics in educational research would be complete without a mention of Dr. Lindquist. He was a professor of education at the Iowa College of Education, and he is credited with having created the ACT, which is one of, if not the most important college entrance exam in the United States. He also is credited with inventing these scantrons, right? So these um, paper slides that are used for multiple choice testing. But prior to all of that, Dr. Lindquist had written the book in 1940 entitled Statistical Analysis in Educational Research. And it was the first of its kind at that time. And so he is considered by many to be the father of statistical analysis in education. Now, the modern day application of statistics have in education has exploded and expanded to many different areas. And so, of course, there is all the innovation happening with this digital era. And so there is the use of the actual digital forms in education, which is heavily researched, but also with the new environment, new society, there is research into what is the outcome of education. What should be emphasis? What is the value of knowledge based education versus skill based education? And so those and other things, other topics are heavily researched. Then, of course, technology, psychology, the quality of education across the globe is being considered and consulted and examined all the time. And traditionally, research has always been conducted on issues of the social aspects of learning, the various ways of adaptive learning, inclusive learning, connection, and what roles these play in the learning process. And most recently, e-learning has become the buzzword with the expansion of the internet and all digital based learning, especially after the pandemic. There's much research because, of course, there's a lot of data that is coming in. So that is presenting an opportunity for research. So those are some of the main areas where research is growing rapidly. And as a result, the application of statistics is becoming more and more a part of all of these areas of research. And as far as the opportunities are concerned, I mentioned the trends, but there is learning analytics where all of the various ways that students are engaging, students are learning, and now with so much of it taking place online or through some form of digital media, that all of that data is being accumulated. And so there is concerted effort on the part of educators and those involved in education management to collect that data, to study that data, to analyze the data, and hone the insight and the information that is contained within the data. And so, not just in terms of the tools and the processes, but when it comes to the strategies, the curriculum, the learning process, the implementation of different methods, different styles, all of these are being investigated. And finally, management of education is becoming a major theme, given that so much of education now has a financial aspect. You know, education is expensive, and in a lot of areas, it is also revenue generating. And so, lots of investigation is going on because there is competition and there are stakeholders involved. And so, they need the research to be conducted to understand and to learn and to gather and to devise and to make decisions. And to speak directly to some of the ways that statistics have been applied in already in the past in the area of educational research, and this is just an overview, but it is used in general to get some understanding of the trends and the patterns that exist in the data. It's all statistics is also used to identify, to uncover the relationships between certain variables, whether it is the demographics of the students and the outcome in terms of the performance or the GPA, or whether it relates to a style of teaching or particular subject or particular environment. All of these variables are studied using statistical analyses. And of course, and the analysis and the application of statistics reveals areas for improvement, but it's most effective in helping to give an objective assessment of the programs and policies that have been implemented by way of intervention in education so that we can make a determination, unbiased determination of whether these interventions are doing what they intended to do. Application of statistics in educational research in general allows for us to gain insight into some of the common issues of teaching and learning, and it is what lends credibility to the work of many clinician educators who are trying to solve some of the more fundamental issues of education, who are providing important insights for decision making and for policy. They are dependent on the application of statistics to their research. And of course, statistics is helping to inform decisions about budget and assignment and placement and other important aspects of education. So, in general, overall, statistics provides the education educator researcher with a very distinct advantage. And this advantage is not unique to education per se, but as with in other areas of research, statistics allows helps us to hone in on the right question for the right problem, to develop an appropriate hypothesis, and then use a time proven strategy to answer the questions through the data, and then provide an evaluation of the strength of the evidence as far as that question and answer is concerned. So now that we have an understanding of the importance of statistics in educational research and the benefit and the advantage that it can bring, it's important that the statistics is applied correctly. And before we can get to the application of the statistics itself, we need to understand where and how these statistical tools and principles fit into the research design. So let's talk about some of the main principles of research design. Now, when it comes to the design of your research, there are some fundamental issues that must be answered. Research design is in falls under two major camps. It can either be quantitative research or qualitative research. And quantitative, as the name implies, answers quantitative questions, questions of quantity or number. How many, how much, how often. And when qualitative research answers questions of quality, of category, of label. So the what and the why and the how. That's what the qualitative design would be answering. Qualitative research emphasizes meaning or it helps to develop a theory. And the different types of qualitative research include ethnographic, historical, narrative, and we're going to look more closely at each of these. But these are the types of research that are going to analyze data expressed in words or labels. The quantitative research designs are numerical, use and analyze numerical data. It will summarize cross-sectional data or find patterns or trends in the data or test relationships in the data, or you can use the analysis to make inferences and predictions from the data to the general population. And so the different types of quantitative research designs are descriptive, correlational, comparative, experimental, or quasi experimental. So now that we have an understanding of the two main types of research design, quantitative or qualitative, let's take a look at some of the methodologies of quantitative and qualitative type research. And we can look at a, a map here of how this research these are grouped. So for the qualitative type research, these include here the content analysis, historical type research, and as we mentioned, the ethnographic, narrative, case studies. These are all qualitative type research. The quantitative type research, experimental or quasi experimental. Then there's a single subject research, which is the quantitative alternative to the case study. There's also the correlational type research, as well as the causal comparative, and then there's survey type research. And survey type is unique because it can be quantitative as well as qualitative, depending on how the research, how the survey is designed and implemented. And so, as I mentioned, survey type research is where you're using questionnaires or interviews to collect the information from your sample. And you can either make that very specific or general. You can send it out to as many people as you want. And of course, there's always going to be some percent of response from your target audience. Then you will collect that data and you will analyze. Now you can have surveys that are based answering very specific questions where the responder just ticks, chooses an answer that's already there, or you can have more open ended type questions where they can fill in whatever response they feel is appropriate. And so those are the two different types in terms of the quantitative versus the qualitative type research. And you can use the information collected from survey data for descriptive or analytical type study, but must be aware of the potential for bias because there is always a certain type of person who will respond to a survey and a certain type of person who will not respond to your survey. Now, the ethnographic type research, this is where you're collecting information about a group that share a culture. And so the goal is to gather information to understand and to describe and to analyze information related to that group's culture and understanding the cultural norms as it affects the process of education, the learning of the students. What are some of the things that their culture believes that influences the way that they approach learning and education? Phenomenological type research, similar to ethnographic type research, except that here the focus is not on the group but on the individual. It's about the subject's lived experience and trying to find some themes and some meaning units that helps to enlighten and to explain the essence of a phenomena. Why, what is the reason for the behavior or the belief or the approach? What's the guiding force? And trying to get to that information is what is covered in phenomenological type research, and it borrows from the field of psychology. In case study, this is from education, from epidemiological type study, health studies, where you have just one subject and you are conducting an in-depth, detailed examination of that case to try and collect and gather as much information and as much insight as you can, all of the key characteristics of the phenomena, so as to get a new understanding and or maybe and challenge some of the old ideas about that particular problem. So trying to see what is the personal belief as far as this issue is concerned, co- contrasting that with the general idea that the society may hold. And that can prove very enlightening. So it may be the idea that math is supposed to be taught only with numbers, and this person may feel that that may not be the best way. So, why is that? And trying to understand what can be gained from such an approach. And historical type research, this is where you find the records and archives and historical data and you analyze it for insight of some of the past events and phenomenon as it relates to education that could prove useful to the current era. And so there might be things that might have been gained knowledge, understood, that may not have been uh, used, acknowledged, put to use at the time, but it may prove useful now. And so that insight can be of benefit even in today's digital world. So that would be historical type research. So we looked at some of the qualitative type research. Now let's look at more of the quantitative, because this is where the statistical analysis is mostly applied. With the content analysis, historical, ethnographic type research, the qualitative research, there is, in the past, there was not any statistics being applied to the data. It was very limited. Everything was manually done by the researcher. Now things are different because the mass of data collected, even from, say, a content analysis, can be huge. And so there's the application of science, of computer science and machine learning that has changed some of these content analysis And so we'll take a look at that. But now let's focus on the more traditional quantitative type research. Before we do that, though, we want to get an understanding of what statistics is all about. So, statistics is where we are looking, we're trying to understand some particular issue or phenomenon about a population. But what we do is we use sample data. And again, this is based on the fact that in the past, we were not able to collect data on entire populations, and we still aren't for the most case. And even though now we can get much more data, we still must be aware that there is the idea of this is a sample of the population. And so we're making some generalization, we're making estimations about this population based on a sample. So we have a population, we sample that population, we measure some features, some characteristic of this population, say the height, the age, the IQ, and we make a generalization. We say the average weight of the people in this group is 70 kilograms. And we report that as the average or the mean, but then we also report that with some level of the evidence, the weight of evidence, the likelihood that it is true. And that we then infer as belonging to the entire population. So that's the idea of statistics. So we have our sample, and now we can get some characteristics, some features, which we call the independent variables, and we measure the independent variables from the subjects in our sample, and that we are going to then determine what is the relationship between this variable, the independent variable or the predictor variable, and the outcome. So, how does the location of the students affect their performance? And those are just the demographic type of variables, right? We can look, so those are the demographic type variables. We can also look at some other type of variables specific to education, and they can serve as predictor variables as well in terms of helping us understand the relationship between these variables and the outcome of in question. And so we can have these predictor variables. These might be some cofactors that may influence the main predictor variables. And so we investigate, we analyze the data to get an understanding, and we may even try to come to some understanding. We may even try to model the relationship between these two variables if it is a relationship that is a linear relationship or not. And then we will report the strength of that relationship using our statistical terms. So now that we have an understanding of what the aim of statistic is, which is to measure features in the sample or as to model relationships of between the variables in the sample, and then infer those relationships back to the general population with some measure of the likelihood that this is true. Then now we can look at the quantitative type of analysis. And so the first quantitative type of analysis here is the correlational analysis. And that is where we're trying to identify, to quantify the relationship between two variables. So we are measuring, we're trying to determine the strength as well as the direction of the relationship between these two variables. Are they negatively correlated or positively correlated? And how strong is the correlation? Is it a one, meaning 100% correlated? As one changes, the other changes just as much, or is it just a zero point 0.5 correlation? So it's a weak or a moderate correlation. So that's what correlation studies are seeking to understand. And so here we have this study trying to understand the relationship between parental involvement and urban secondary school achievement. So does the measure of level of parent involvement affect the level of achievement? That would be a correlational type study. Then we have the experimental study. And as the term implies, you're actually performing an experiment where you have controls and you have treatment. And so in this study, they're trying to understand the effect of challenge based gamification in learning. And so they're going to have one group that's using some kind of a gamification and another group that is not using the gamification, and to see how, to evaluate the performance of each of those groups and determine if there is a difference and if that difference is statistically significant. So that's an experimental type of study. And then we have the educational data mining, which has become a field in and of itself. So yes, we have the historical data because we used to, there was data that was amassed but was never really studied. And so now with the computer science and the computing power available, we can mine massive amounts of data and analyze that data to get some understanding of some of the processes of learning. So, for example, in this study, it's looking at predicting students' performance in educational data mining. Similar to the data mining is the content analysis. Now, content analysis has been a part of research long before we had the sophisticated computers. And so we would collect the data manually, usually some type of written form, or if it was an interview where the the responses were recorded and then transcribed, and then we would read through the text and try to see where the words were similar, their meanings, and doing all that manual. But now we can use natural language processing or NLP and machine learning that allows us to analyze social media posts, open ended surveys, online interviews, anywhere that people are providing textual responses. We can gather that information and analyze it, and it allows us to determine some of the sentiments, which is then called the sentiment analysis, or we can see what are some of the topics that are bubbling up as being important, or we can even try to detect some of the intent in these text passages. It gives an overview of themes and insight into patterns. So, the data collection process. Now, once you have an understanding of what is the research methodology of choice in your research design, now you know which population you are interested in. So, once you have an understanding of the general idea of the research design and methodology, now you can start thinking in terms of, okay, what is the phenomenon that I am interested in? What is the problem that I feel drawn to? Is it student performance? Is it engagement? Is it curriculum? Is it teacher burnout? What is it that some problems you might be interested in? And then in that big problem, there might be a very specific uh, purpose you have where to reduce burnout among teachers. And so you develop a question, a research question as it relates to that. And what that does means is that you're going to get very specific in terms of what is the outcome variable and what is the predictive variable that you're going to be looking at. So, what effect does tenure have on teacher burnout? Oh, is burnout related to location, or is burnout related to gender? So those are the things. This is the way you develop. So now that you have that, you have to determine, are those variables quantitative variables in terms of the outcome, or is it qualitative? Right? So what is the overall question that you're asking? Is this a why question to understand meaning, or this is a question to ask how much or to what extent? And so when you have established that, now you have the research phenomenon. In this case, the factors causing English as a foreign language students' low performance in reading, right? And so you want to explore what are these factors involved, and then you hone in on the fact that maybe storytelling can have a positive effect, and you want to research that question, that issue. And so now you realize that you have the variables in question: reading proficiency among EFL learners, and the use of short stories. Now, how are you going to measure the reading proficiency? Is it going to be a test, or is it going to be the students' response about how they feel about reading, their reading proficiency? So these are some of the things you keep in mind, and this is going to determine the choice, the methodology of how you collect your data, right? So you can either use data that already exists, whether that's in an archive or on the internet or from the LMS, right? So that would be secondary data. If you're going to collect the data yourself, then that's primary data. So are you going to use an interview or a focus group? Those would be the qualitative type of data collection. If you are doing an experiment, then you're going to have to set up the control group versus the experimental group relative to the variable that you want to test. And so these are the different types of statistical analysis. And I won't go into details in any of them because this is what we will be covering in the live classes, right? But when it comes to statistics, there are two main groups: the descriptive statistic and the inferential statistic, right? And so when we think about the process, remember, this is identifying the problem, deciding on your research question, choosing the design and the methodology, whether it's a quantitative or a qualitative. What kind of question are you asking? And will you use historical data or secondary data, or are you going to collect the data yourself? And so then you can determine what analysis is appropriate for the data that you've collected. So you can determine what is the methodology and how you're going to collect the data. And then you can decide, is it going to be qualitative or quantitative in the primary data? Or are you going to use secondary data? And again, even among the secondary data, there is qualitative with respect to sentiment and analysis. And then there's quantitative. You can do a meta analysis or a data mining type of analysis. And that's going to then determine what type of test you're going to do here. Which one of these formulas, these principles, these mathematical statistical principles will you apply? Are you going to do a more of an exploratory, descriptive type of analysis, or are you going to actually test some of the relationships between the variable? Will you be trying to diagnose a problem, or are you trying to make some recommendations about a problem? Right? And so once you've done your analysis, you can now, we will talk all about that in the live session, but just to remind you that when it comes to statistical analysis and your research endeavor as a whole, it's important to keep your stakeholders in mind, and always remember that you're trying to answer questions. The what question, the why question. In case of the quantitative analysis, it's also the how much question, and then the what next question. What is the recommendation? What is the suggestion? What is the prescription? And so you're telling a story in terms of the problem, the actual present day situation, and then some kind of predicted outcome. So you want to know the audience and the stakeholders, and you want to report your findings accurately, meaning not exaggerating or minimizing, but also clearly, to so that the audiences and their level of technical understanding is appropriate, and that you're also reporting efficiently, because you may find a lot of things but only some are pertinent. And that's what is important when it comes to reporting these findings. Of course, what you're going to share in a presentation will be different from what you will share if you are publishing in a scientific journal. And so that brings us to the end. Congratulations, and you're now ready to embark on your statistics journey. And I look forward to seeing you next month.